Thank you, everybody, for having me as a speaker today. I greatly appreciate it. First, I want to start off with a thought exercise. So I want everybody to, you don't have to close your eyes, but imagine yourself on an old ship in the northern Atlantic, and it's been blown off course, and you're not quite sure where you are, but it's cold. It's November, and everybody is meeting in the hull of the ship to determine what to do next. One of the people that's on the ship with you gets up and says, the King of England gave us a charter for a particular place. We're not there, and that charter no longer applies to us. So let's not have any laws anymore. Let's just do whatever the heck we want to do. Everybody's talking, everybody's discussing this, everybody's worried about what's going to happen to them. But they do kind of agree about that maybe this charter isn't so legal anymore. Maybe it's null and void in the place they're at. Well, tall man, military bearing gets up, lets everybody know, we're not sure where we are. We have nobody to protect us here. Perhaps instead of thinking that there should be no law, maybe we should make some new law in this new place we're at. And fast forward, it's 1620. That's Colonel William Bradford talking to the members of the Mayflower and essentially convincing them not to be anarchists and to adopt a constitution. All 41 male members of the Mayflower signed the Mayflower Compact, basically the first American Constitution. What's interesting about that is several hundred years later, the late 1700s, our founding fathers signed a new constitution for our country. So the U.S. Constitution that we live under now. Many of the elements that our current Constitution have were drawn from that original Mayflower Compact. And what's interesting, and the reason why I'm kind of talking a little bit about it today, is when we first become lawyers, we take an oath of admission to the Florida bar. And the first thing that we swear to, there's many things we swear to, but the first thing we swear to is I do solemnly swear I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of Florida. So the Constitution really starts and is the basics of our civil society and the rules of ethics we use as lawyers and that the courts enforce against us and for our clients. So it's kind of interesting that, a group of people that were shivering didn't know where they were somewhere in northern Massachusetts off Cape Cod and no lawyers with them, kind of are the genesis of our ethical system today. You can draw the line right back to them. Now, one of the interesting things about Florida's ethical code, rules regulating the Florida bar, and rules of professional conduct is, of course, there's many rules. I'm not going to go through them all today. I wanted to point a few things out that help us practice law and become better lawyers. There's a preamble to the rules, and most lawyers haven't read the preamble. And I've always thought to myself, the preamble is actually a better way of describing how to be a lawyer than the rules themselves. Because remember, ethics are the bare minimum. Ethics are what you can't breach, otherwise your law license is going to be taken or you'll be disciplined. When a client hires us, the client is not asking for an ethical lawyer. They're asking for an aspirational lawyer, a lawyer at the top of their game. And the preamble kind of walks through that and talks about that. It's interesting. It breaks down a lawyer into three categories. So as lawyers, we have three separate personalities, three things that we can do as lawyers. The first is the legal practitioner, the person who gets the work done. And we all do that. What Lincoln used to call the drudgery of the law. There's no substitute for just sitting down and getting the work done sometimes. So that's the legal practitioner part. The other part is the officer of the court. All right. So, every lawyer is an officer of the court. And of course, when a lawyer gets elected to be a judge, they're certainly an officer of the court. Um, but the third part of being a lawyer, and it kind of outlines it in the preamble, is being a public citizen. And I would put to everybody here that being a public citizen is actually the most important part of being a lawyer. Of course, the drudgery of the law, knowing what you do, being able to work hard. Yep, that's what your clients expect. Being honest to the judiciary and being an officer of the court, certainly that's a big part of what we do. But when our peers and friends and family and people in our community look to us as lawyers, so the non-lawyers in our lives, they're looking at us as a public citizen, as somebody that should step above, be a leader in our community. One of the reasons that I wrote this book, Being a Lawyer, is to inspire other lawyers to be better public citizens and get out in their communities and engage and make where you live just a wonderful, wonderful place, because you're in it and many other people that are just working hard to make it. And you can see this looking at some of the great lawyers that we look up to in our profession and in our lives. Abraham Lincoln, being one of them. John Adams, being another. Thomas Jefferson. We can go through quite a few, but all of them were great lawyers. All of them could try a case. All of them could do all the things that a client would want us to do, but they went beyond that. They were true public citizens. All right. One of the ways I found over the years to truly be and embrace the public citizen part of being a lawyer is there's many ways to do it, but I think the best way to do it is get involved in nonpartisan judicial races. Our judges are very good, but they're handicapped to a certain extent with what they're allowed to say and what they're allowed to do in a judicial race. So we all understand every 6 years, our judges have to run for reelection. Thankfully, many of them don't draw opposition, but that is something that happens a lot. But oftentimes there's an open spot open, and a lawyer, a friend of yours may want to be running. Somebody's running against them. They're great opportunities to get out, meet people, and help your friend that wants to become a judge or already is a judge, who is very limited in what they can say. They can say they support the Constitution. They can say that they're going to be a great judge. They can't say a lot of other things. And I won't go through that because that's not part of the CLE today. But what I want to say is part of being a public citizen as a lawyer is getting out there and participating in those campaigns. You'd be surprised at how much you get out of it as a lawyer as opposed to what you're giving into it. I strongly encourage that. So earlier I was talking about how ethics are just the bare minimum. It's the floor of what we're looking at as lawyers. I always cringe when I hear somebody say, "Oh, I'm very ethical." I think to myself, wait a minute, you're saying that your bar is the bare minimum? No, you want to be much higher than that and beyond that, beyond reproach. But it's always, I always get a little chuckle out of it when somebody says, "Oh, I'm so very ethical." We're privileged to be lawyers, and the privilege is obvious. When we get out, we're able to do what we're able to do. But it's also part of the rules. One of the rules that talks about this is Rules of Discipline 3-1.1. They actually call it the privilege to practice, and it states, "A license to practice law confers no vested right to the holder thereof, but is a conditional privilege that is revocable for cause." I always think about this because we have no right to be a lawyer. We went to law school, we took the bar, we passed, of course, we got sworn in, all those things. And from our perspective as young lawyers, we probably thought, "Wow, I deserve this. I've done all these things." 30 years into practice of law, I've realized, you know what, this really is a true privilege. Not only because I think so, but the Florida Supreme Court has this rule that says, yeah, it is a privilege, and it's revocable for cause. It's also interesting, what the preamble states when it comes to the rules of professional conduct. One sentence, kind of interesting. Compliance with the rules, as with all law in an open society, depends primarily upon understanding and voluntary compliance. Secondarily, upon reinforcement by peer and public opinion, and finally, when necessary, upon enforcement through disciplinary proceedings. And essentially, what that means in very, very short terms is the rules that of ethics that apply to us. They're self-actualizing. We're the ones that have to do it, and we're the ones that have to correct others that we're working with. And eventually, if that doesn't happen, the Florida Bar and the Florida Supreme Court gets involved. But that's just a very small slice of the pie. What we do every day when we get up, open the door to our office, sit down, and start to work. We're the ones that are self-regulating, and it really is, a privilege, and it goes back to the whole idea of the privilege of practice law, because we as lawyers, not only do we get to self-regulate ourselves when we're practicing every day, our profession gets to self-regulate itself. So again, going back to the Constitution, three branches of government, our branch is the judicial branch. Lawyers are regulated by the judicial branch. The Florida Bar is controlled 100% by the Florida Supreme Court, not by the legislature, not by the governor. It's been kind of interesting over the past 10 years. There's been, some efforts by the legislature to take the regulation of lawyers and put it into the executive branch. And that's always stopped, thankfully, and we're still self-regulated. So that's part of the privilege, because no other profession gets to be self-regulated like we are. And it all starts with each and every one of us looking at what we do every day and doing our best to surpass the minimum standards that we're looking at. I remember, getting sworn in years ago, and I didn't feel so privileged that day because I'm a young lawyer, or a young soon-to-be lawyer. I had an old beat-up car, and I was trying to make it to the courthouse to the swearing-in ceremony. My car broke down. It was like August. It was such a hot day. It was like 100 degrees. My water heater, broke, and so I'm on the side of the road in this suit, and I'm sweating, and I just felt humiliated. I had to call my dad. Hey, Dad, would you come pick me up and bring me to the courthouse, and so I can get sworn in? So finally, I made it there, and I looked like a wreck, and got sworn in, raised my hand up, and um, you know, didn't feel so privileged that day. But looking back on it today, I can smile and say it was a wonderful day. Um, One of the things that we need to think about each and every day, and we don't often associate this with the rules of professionalism for the Florida Bar, but it does go part and parcel with it, is being a kind lawyer. We need to be civil to each other. Remember my Irish grandmother, Grandma Kay, used to tell me, Jimmy, kill 'em with kindness. And I'd always thought that was very odd. How could you kill somebody with kindness? Very, very Irish saying. But I think she was right. It's often the best way to treat somebody, even if you have an adversarial relationship, even if you have to bite your tongue when you're listening to them speak. And as professional as we want to be, as kind as we want to be, obviously we're human, and people can get on our skin and get us angry. But the best way to respond is just pure kindness, because it's kind of interesting. Most people aren't expecting it from an adversarial relationship. And it's okay to have different opinions. It's okay to argue. Um, but it's also okay to be kind afterwards. Uh, Remember years ago, I got sworn in as a member of the bar of the United States Supreme Court. And if anybody here has ever done it, it's a wonderful, you know what a wonderful experience it is. But if you haven't, it doesn't matter how many years you've been a lawyer, a day, 50 years, it's worth doing. You can apply. You have to have two members of the U.S. Supreme Court to vouch for you. So anybody here that wants to do it, I'm a member. I will vouch for you. I'll sign off because it's just a great time. So we go to Washington D.C. and part of the nice thing about getting sworn into the U.S. Supreme Court is they give you a free breakfast. So they bring you into the justices' breakfast room. There's a huge spread, wonderful. I recommend their breakfast. And afterwards, they bring you into the courtroom, the U.S. Supreme Court's main courtroom, and you get front row seat, and you get to listen to the cases that get argued that day. So we got sworn in by Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts. We all sit down, and I'm looking at a young lawyer sitting in front of me. He couldn't have been 29 or 30, just a very young guy, and very rare for somebody that young to be making an argument. Um, I looked at his hand, and I could see his hand shaking underneath the table. He had a big book binder. He looked very, very, very nervous. I, I didn't blame him. My heart went out to him. I thought to myself, gosh, I'd be shaking my boots too if I was getting ready to make an argument to the U.S. Supreme Court. A moment later, the U.S. Solicitor General, the United States of America's lawyer that makes arguments in the Supreme Court, comes walking in. He's got his morning coat on. He looks tan. He's got a nice smile. He looks great. He looks like a great gregarious lawyer. He's got five or six other lawyers behind him with bags, literally holding his bags for him. Comes in, I was so impressed, walks up to the young lawyer, shakes his hand, asks him how he's doing, wishes him luck, and then the arguments start. And it was fascinating, just this little bit of kindness from the U.S. Solicitor General really gave some backbone to this young man, and he did a great job arguing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. I was so impressed, especially after watching him fidget beforehand because he looked so nervous. All right, so the arguments ended. Everybody was leaving. I decided, you know what? How often do I get to hang out with at the U.S. Supreme Court? So I'm going to stick around for 5 minutes and just kind of look at everything on the wall. So I sat in my seat in the front, and I'm watching all the justices line out. And Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was still alive, but she was very ill at the time, and she looked very, very frail. She was moving very slowly off the dais, and she started going down the staircase. I noticed that she tripped. She started falling face first. Because of her robe, she wasn't able to get her arms up. Um, and I'm looking at this. I think I was the last person in the room, other than the bailiffs that they have there, the U.S. Marshals. And I thought to myself, oh my, this poor lady is going to fall and crack her head open. But just as I thought that, a big, large hand came out and grabbed her by the arm. It literally picked her back up straight. And I look over at who the arm belongs to, and it's Justice Thomas. And I thought to myself, wow, what a great example of just pure kindness. He basically saved Ruth Bader Ginsburg from falling. So from Washington D.C. all the way to Florida, just remember, be a kind lawyer. It's the right thing to do, but you also, when you swore in your oath as a lawyer, you also agreed to it. The oath of admission states, to opposing parties and their counsel, I pledge fairness, integrity, and civility, not only in court, but also in the written and oral communications. So it's a requirement. All right. I encourage everybody to be diplomatic in their practice of law too. And it's interesting how much being a diplomatic lawyer can help your clients get what they want and what the goal is that they give you. Um, remember about a year ago, I was at my house all alone. My family was visiting some other parts of her family, other members of her family. I heard this crazy loud crash outside, and I thought to myself, "Wow, it sounds like somebody's breaking into my house." So I run outside and walk out by my garage, trying to figure out where the noise is coming from because it actually absolutely stopped. And I look down, and there's two little bear cubs looking up at me. And I see the backside of a mama bear in my trash can, and she's stuck. She was eating my garbage and ate so much of it she got stuck in my trash can. I'm standing there a foot away from three bears, a mama bear and her two cubs, and I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, I don't want to be in this situation. This isn't good at all." Um, so I took a step back and I screamed out, "Get out of here!" And the the mama bear falls over in the trash can and somehow gets herself out and spreads my garbage all over my front garage area, and they all run away. And I tell a story when I'm talking about being diplomatic, and that we all have bears that show up in our lives periodically. And when bears show up, um, one of the big rules in life, as my Alaskan grandmother used to tell me, Jimmy, don't feed the bears. And that's important. When the bears of your life show up, be diplomatic. Um, the first rule of diplomacy, especially when it comes to bears, is tell you what, as long as you don't eat me, I won't mess with you. Let's just stay on our in our lanes. And that applies to many people that we come across too, doesn't it? The bears in our life. Let the bears go their way. Let them go to somebody else's house. Let them go. So being diplomatic really is just as simple as that. Um, don't respond to callous comments. Don't take the bait, so to speak. When somebody's throwing it out there for you, just let the bear be a bear, and you can be diplomatic. People respond to that, and you know what? And your clients see that, and they see a lot of classiness when you're being diplomatic too. Your clients understand it. The bar requires all of us to be competent in everything we do, um, and it's important because we're all not competent in some area of the law. I'm a plaintiff's personal injury lawyer, so I'm an expert in what I do for a living. I'm not an expert in just about everything else in the law. So when somebody comes and says, "Hey, Jim, can you do a will for me?" Well, could I do a will? Sure, I guess I could. Um, would I want somebody to rely on that will if they die, that make sure that everything goes the way they want? No, they shouldn't rely on a will that I draft. They shouldn't rely on a real estate contract that I draft. Something like that. I'm not competent. I need to refer it to somebody that knows what they're doing. Um, Referrals are important, not only because it's part of the rule of competence. If we can't do it, we need to get it out of our office and into somebody else's hands. But it's also good for being related to other lawyers and understanding what our fellow lawyers do for a living. And in order to do that, you got to get out and talk to people, have lunch with them, ask them, "Hey, Mary, what do you do for your practice? Tell me a little bit about it." And you learn what everybody does in your community. And when a client comes by with one of these out of the ballpark kind of questions, "Hey, look, got this problem. Can you help me? Or do you know somebody that can help me? Um, Being able to know who does that and get them there quickly. I tell you what, that client that you passed on is going to be extremely grateful to you. And you're going to be extremely grateful to yourself because you didn't take on something you didn't know how to do and eventually get some problems. Oftentimes the best client is the client you choose not to take. We'll talk a little bit about diligence. So it's kind of interesting. The rule to be a diligent lawyer is the shortest rule in the Florida Bar's rule book, and it's one sentence: a lawyer shall act with reasonable diligence and promptness in representing a client. Wow, that's pretty easy. That's short. But how do you do that, right? I mean, it's easy to say, hey, look, get it done fast, and um, you know, don't be a procrastinator. But we're all human, right? And sometimes things just don't get done. Sometimes we have distractions. Actually, all the time we have distractions. I think all of us, it's you know half hour into this presentation, all of us have probably had a number of distractions just in this past half hour. We could probably list 20 of them that happened earlier today. We're going to have more this afternoon. Um, Distractions are um, deadly when it comes to diligence and being a diligent lawyer. Here's an easy way to get around it, and a lot of people may not like this one. I don't either because I'm not an early person, but we all have to be early lawyers. There's no substitute to getting up early and getting things done. Back when I was in the Army had this kind of funny saying, we get more done before 9 than most people get done in a day. And that is true for people who get up early. When you look at somebody who's up early, they oftentimes before 9, they've gotten more done than most people do in an entire day. One of my favorite founding fathers is Benjamin Franklin. And Benjamin Franklin had a great quote in his autobiography. Great autobiography, by the way, if you're looking for something to read this summer. And part of his autobiography is just the humor of it because he lists all the things that a great person, an aspirational person, needs to do in order to be successful, and then he lists all the ways he screwed it up. And that's the reason why these are the rules to do well in life because I've screwed them all up. Um, Great quote. Basically, those who rise late trot all day, and I kind of laugh at that one because it's true. On the days that I'm just not feeling well and I'm up late, up late in the morning, you really are rushing to get everything done. And when you're rushing, the distractions are always going to hit you, um, to track from your diligence and make you a worse lawyer. So there's really no better option other than just getting up and getting it done. I'd also like to encourage everybody here to be a courageous lawyer. Every morning we wake up and there's mornings that a lot of us are look out the window and we're just like, you know what, I'm not feeling it today. I don't even want to get out of bed. Um, there's but in the back of your mind, you're like, okay, I've got all this on my calendar. I have all these things that need to get done. And if I don't do them today, they're going to be there tomorrow. It can take courage just to get out of bed sometimes and get moving. Um, it's interesting though. We need to remember, when we're evaluating clients or new projects, new things to do, even in our facet as being a citizen lawyer, um, really looking at that courageous element. The Florida bar rules really don't talk about being courageous. They kind of hint around about it. One of the rules, kind of interesting. It's a rule 4-1 sub B, and the tagline is no endorsement of clients' views or activities. And it's you know, it's somewhat obvious and a little bit funny when you think about it, but the rule states a lawyer's representation of a client, including representation by appointment, does not constitute an endorsement of the client's political, economic, social, or moral views or activities. And of course, we all know this. When we represent a client, you know, whether the client's reprehensible or whether they're an angel or somewhere in between, you know, we do not take on, you know, the attributes of our clients or what they think or what they do. Now, um, does the general public think that? Sometimes not. And that's where the courageousness part comes in. You know, in order for the system to work, we have to be able and be willing to take on some tough clients at times, simply because it takes courage for us to even stand next to them, um, and and uh, and not worry about, you know, what that might do for our own, you know, public, um, you know, reputation. We're fortunate though in the country we practice law in, because we don't need the kind of, you know, physical um, courageousness that lawyers in some other countries have. Um, I've read recently about a Chinese lawyer named Gao Sheng. He disappeared about 10 years ago. Nobody knows where he is, but he had a long practice in China. He represented Christians, Muslims, Buddhists in trying to get them rights to practice their religion in communist China. Um, he was put in prison over a decade ago, and he was let out on house arrest. One of his fellow lawyers, a friend, came to visit him and noticed that all his teeth were smashed out and his face was beaten and he was emaciated. Clearly had been tortured. Uh, Soon after this, he was gone. Um, you know, we're very fortunate in this country that we don't have to worry about getting our teeth beat in after walking out of a courtroom. Um, you know, like I said before, I'm a trial lawyer. I've walked out of many courtrooms across Florida in very contentious situations. Not once has, you know, somebody, you know, taken a swing at me or hurt me physically, and of course I do appreciate that. We take it for granted that that's something we can do as lawyers in this state in this country. We can say what we want within limits, of course, in the courtroom. But you know, at the end of the day, we're able to get our point across for our clients and go home, have a nice dinner, and enjoy ourselves afterwards, not go to prison. So be a courageous lawyer. Think about lawyers that don't have that right. Another thing that's important, uh, if we want to survive in this practice, is being a healthy lawyer. Um, you know, we can beat ourselves up a lot, you know, with worry, with stress, with just the hours sometimes. You know, it can weigh on our health. And there was a consultant years ago named Stephen Covey who had a great saying. He stated, you know, part of, you know, being a great professional, part of being able to get up every day and do what, you know, you're meant to do well is sharpening your saw. You got to take time from whatever you're doing and sharpen your saw so you're sharp again. And we all feel that, you know, before we take a vacation. Um, you know, we got some brain fog going on. You know, we're tired. You go on vacation, and if it's long enough, of course, right? You come back and you feel sharp, you feel fresh. You're like, you know what? I actually want to practice some law today. You know, I'm looking forward to the challenge because I've sharpened that saw blade back up. I'm ready to go. Now, there's a dark side to health, of course, and we've all seen it. You know, when your health fails you, and it's something that, you know, has been ignored for years, it's hard to practice law. And you know, despite, you know, a lawyer's best efforts, if your health fails you, um, either you're not going to be able to practice law, or the Florida bar will get involved. It's interesting. The Florida bar cares about your health, but perhaps not in the way we would all desire. The Rule 3-7.13 basically states a lawyer can be removed from the practice of the law, even though no misconduct is alleged or proved, if that lawyer is deemed to be too unhealthy to practice law. So it's interesting. It's one of the only rules in the professional code of conduct and the disciplinary rules that basically allows a lawyer to be removed from practice, even if they have not done anything wrong or haven't hurt the client. So while being healthy is certainly a very aspirational thing, and we all have to work hard on it. I know I work hard on my own health, and sometimes I'm successful, sometimes not so successful. But the flip side is, if you don't have your health, you can't be a great lawyer. You can't help the people you need to help. Lastly, wanted to just talk about being a thankful lawyer. There's no rule that says you have to be thankful. In fact, it's not a requirement. It's just an aspiration. But I actually think it's probably the most important thing. After 30 years of practice, I'm very thankful for each and every client that's ever hired me. All of them were putting their problems in my hands, and in all of our hands. We forget sometimes what kind of trust people have when they come to us, like, hey, help me out. I need this or that. Whatever their problem is, they're placing a lot of trust in us as lawyers, and we need to be thankful for that. I'm thankful for a great country with a great constitution that allows us to practice law with freedom, and the ability somebody physically hurting us. And I'm thankful for all the lawyers here. I appreciate everybody looking at their own practice, and working hard to be better lawyers, because as good a lawyers as we all are, we can all always be just a little bit better. And that's something that I'm thankful about for our practice. I'll leave it with this, and we'll have some short question and answers after this too. But part of writing my book, being a lawyer, had a lot to do with just being thankful after 30 years. And I got elected to the Florida Bar Board of Governors for the 18th Circuit, so that's Seminole County and Brevard County. And part of what we do on the Board of Governors is we have a disciplinary committee that reviews different factual scenarios where lawyers have done things that at times justify being disbarred. And so we make recommendations to the Florida Supreme Court. And one of the things I notice is, the Florida bar comes, across kind of heavy sometimes and heavy-handed on basically saying, these are the rules. You better, comply with these rules. Otherwise, we're going to discipline you. And it's one of the reasons why I talked a lot about the preamble to the rules, because the preamble basically says, hey, look, all of this is within reason, and all of this is to protect our clients, and all of this is to make sure that our country has lawyers that protect and defend the U.S. Constitution. And so I like to look at it aspirationally as opposed to the bare minimum. And thanks, everybody. I really appreciate you all being here.